I should have known something was wrong when Mom insisted on taking me to the airport herself. For the past 3 years since she started dating Derek, she'd made it clear that anything involving me was an inconvenience that interrupted her new life. School events, doctor appointments, even my birthday dinner, everything got scheduled around Derek's availability or canceled altogether if he had other plans. But here she was on a Tuesday morning in June, sitting in the driver's seat of Derek's BMW, drumming her manicured nails against the steering wheel while I stared out the passenger window at the Minneapolis skyline rushing past. I was supposed to be flying to Chicago to spend the summer with my dad, the same arrangement we'd had since the divorce when I was 12. "You have everything you need?" Mom asked, not taking her eyes off the traffic. Her voice had that distracted quality it always got when she was thinking about something else, usually Derek. "Yeah," I said, checking my backpack for the 100th time. Wallet with my ID and the $50 Dad had sent for airport snacks. Phone charger. The paperback copy of The Outsiders I'd been rereading. Dad's going to pick me up at O'Hare. Good, that's good. She glanced at her watch, a Cartier that Derek had bought her for Christmas, replacing the simple Timex she'd worn throughout my childhood. "We're making good time." I studied her profile as she drove, trying to figure out why she seemed so nervous. Mom had always been pretty. Auburn hair, green eyes, the kind of smile that made waiters give us free dessert. But since Derek, everything about her had become more polished, more expensive. Designer clothes instead of Target clearance. Weekly salon appointments instead of box dye from the drugstore. Even the way she talked had changed, picking up Derek's habit of ending statements with rhetorical questions, as if she needed constant validation. At 37, she looked younger than she had when I was little, but also somehow less like herself. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You seem, I don't know, weird." "I'm fine, sweetie. Just thinking about everything I need to do today." Everything she needed to do. Not everything we needed to do. Not how she was going to miss me for the summer. Everything she had planned that didn't involve her 15-year-old son. We pulled into the departure level at Minneapolis St. Paul International, and Mom found a spot at the curb despite the no parking signs and the airport security guards gesturing for cars to keep moving. "This is fine," she said, putting the car in park and popping the trunk. "You can catch your flight from here." "Mom, you can't park here. They'll ticket you." "It's just for a minute." I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk. The same black Samsonite I'd been using since I was 12, now held together with duct tape and covered in airline baggage stickers from 3 years of summer trips to Dad's place. It wasn't much, but it contained everything I was bringing for 2.5 months in Chicago. Clothes, books, the gaming console Dad had bought me last Christmas. "Okay," Mom said, giving me a quick hug that felt more like a business handshake. "Have a good summer. Call when you land." Wait. Something felt wrong about this goodbye, though I couldn't put my finger on what. "Are you sure you can't come in with me? Help me check in?" "Honey, you're 15. You can handle checking in for a flight." She was already getting back in the car, already reaching for her phone. "Besides, I have that conference call at 10. "What conference call?" "Work stuff. You wouldn't understand." Mom had quit her job at the insurance company 6 months after she started dating Derek, claiming his financial planning business was doing so well that she didn't need to work anymore. The conference calls were a new development, something to do with Derek's plans to expand into lifestyle management for wealthy clients. "Okay," I said, even though nothing about this felt okay. "I'll call you when I get to Dad's." "Perfect. Love you, baby." She drove away before I could say it back, leaving me standing on the curb with my duct-taped suitcase and a growing feeling that something was seriously off about this whole situation. Inside the terminal, I joined the line for the Delta check-in counter, pulling out my phone to double-check my flight details. Dad had booked everything, sending me a confirmation email with all the information: Flight 1247, departing Minneapolis at 11:30, arriving Chicago at 12:45, seat 23A. Everything looked normal. "Next," called the desk agent, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile. I handed her my ID and pulled out my phone to show her the confirmation email. "I'm checking in for Flight 1247 to Chicago," I said. She scanned my ID, typed something into her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry, but I don't see a reservation under this name for today's flights." "That's not possible," I said, feeling panic start to rise in my chest. "My dad booked it weeks ago. Here, look at the confirmation number." She entered the number, waited, then shook her head. "This reservation was canceled yesterday at 4:47 p.m. Canceled? By who? It doesn't specify, but cancellations can only be made by the person who booked the ticket or someone with access to the confirmation details." My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my phone, looking for Dad's number. This had to be some kind of mistake. Dad wouldn't cancel my flight without telling me. He'd been looking forward to this summer for months, making plans for Cubs games and visits to the Museum of Science and Industry. The call went straight to voicemail. "Dad? It's me," I said, stepping away from the check-in counter. "I'm at the airport, but they're saying my flight was canceled. Can you call me back? I'm confused and I don't know what's going on." I tried again. Voicemail again. Then I called Mom. "Hi, you've reached Lisa. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." The cheerful greeting sounded strange after the distracted, nervous woman who'd dropped me off 20 minutes ago. I stood in the middle of the terminal, watching travelers rush past with their rolling suitcases and boarding passes, and tried to make sense of what was happening. My flight was canceled. My parents weren't answering their phones, and I was stuck at the airport with $50 and no idea what to do next. That's when I saw them, Mom and Derek, walking through the opposite end of the terminal, pulling matching silver suitcases and wearing the kind of casual but expensive clothes that Derek favored for what he called leisure travel. Mom was laughing at something he'd said, looking happier and more relaxed than I'd seen her all morning. They were heading toward the gate area. I followed them, staying far enough back that they wouldn't notice me but close enough to see where they were going. They stopped at Gate B7, where a digital display showed departures to Honolulu, Hawaii. My mother and her boyfriend were flying to Hawaii while I stood in the middle of the airport with a canceled ticket and no way to reach anyone who gave a damn about where I was supposed to be. Watched them through the window of a coffee shop across from their gate, trying to process what I was seeing. Mom kept checking her phone and glancing around nervously, like she was worried about something. Derek seemed oblivious, reading a magazine and occasionally pointing out articles to Mom, who nodded and smiled without really listening. At 10:45, they started boarding first-class passengers for the Honolulu flight. Mom and Derek stood up, gathered their carry-on bags, and got in line. I wanted to run over there, to confront them, to demand an explanation for what was happening. But something kept me frozen in place. Maybe shock. Maybe the growing realization that I already understood exactly what was happening, even if I couldn't accept it yet. They handed their boarding passes to the gate agent and walked down the jet bridge without looking back. I sat in that coffee shop for the next 2 hours, watching their plane taxi away from the gate, watching it disappear into the Minnesota sky, carrying my mother to a tropical vacation she'd apparently planned without mentioning it to me. Around 1 o'clock, I finally got through to Dad. "Alex, where are you? Your flight landed over an hour ago." "Dad, my flight was canceled. I'm still in Minneapolis." "What do you mean, canceled? I booked that ticket 3 weeks ago." "The airline said it was canceled yesterday at 4:47 p.m. Did you cancel it?" "Of course I didn't cancel it." "Why would I cancel it? I've been waiting at baggage claim for over an hour thinking something happened to your plane." I told him about Mom dropping me off, about the canceled reservation, about watching her and Derek board a flight to Hawaii while I sat stranded in the terminal. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Dad? Are you there?" "I'm here." His voice sounded different, flat, angry in a way I rarely heard from him. "Alex, listen to me very carefully. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" "I don't know. I guess I could try to go home, but Mom took Derek's car and I don't have keys to the house. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to book you on the next available flight to Chicago, and I'm going to pay for it with my credit card right now. Then I'm going to call your mother and find out what the hell she thinks she's doing. She's not answering her phone. She'll answer mine. There was something grimly certain in his voice that made me believe him. Are you okay? Dad asked, his tone softening. Are you scared? I looked around the terminal, at the families rushing to catch flights, at the business travelers typing on laptops, at the normal people living normal lives where parents didn't abandon their children in airports, and realized that scared didn't begin to cover what I was feeling. Yeah, I said. I'm scared. I know, buddy. I know. But you're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out. Dad booked me on a 6:30 p.m. flight to Chicago, which meant I had 5 hours to kill in the airport. 5 hours to try to make sense of what my mother had just done to me. I found a quiet corner near my gate and called my best friend Marcus. Dude, aren't you supposed to be in Chicago by now? I told him the whole story. Mom's weird behavior that morning. The canceled flight, seeing her and Derek heading to Hawaii, being stranded with nothing but the clothes on my back and $50. Holy shit, Marcus said when I finished. That's fucked up, man. Like, seriously fucked up. Yeah. What are you going to do? I don't know. Dad's going to try to talk to Mom, but she's probably already on a beach somewhere drinking Mai Tais and pretending she doesn't have a son. You can't go back to your house? I don't have keys, and even if I did, what's the point? Mom made it pretty clear that I'm not part of whatever life she's building with Derek. Marcus was quiet for a minute. You know what? Screw her. You're better off without someone who would do that to their own kid. She's my mom, Marcus. She's supposed to be your mom. Moms don't abandon their kids in airports so they can go on vacation with their boyfriends. He was right, but that didn't make it hurt less. I spent the rest of the afternoon wandering around the terminal, buying overpriced food with my $50 and trying to avoid thinking about what this meant for the rest of my life. If Mom could abandon me once, she could do it again. If she could choose Derek over me for a vacation, what would happen when I graduated high school? When I needed help with college applications? When I just wanted to come home for Christmas? The answer was becoming clearer with each passing hour. I was on my own now, in ways that 15-year-olds aren't supposed to be on their own. When my flight finally boarded at 6:30, I found my seat and stared out the window at the lights of Minneapolis disappearing below. Somewhere down there was the house I'd grown up in, the room where I'd slept every night until this morning, the life I'd thought was mine, even if it had been complicated by divorce and Derek and Mom's transformation into someone I barely recognized. Now I was flying toward Chicago, toward Dad's one-bedroom apartment, and a summer that had suddenly become much more important than just a vacation. Because Chicago might be the only home I had left, and I was going to have to figure out how to build a life there with a father who was as shocked by this betrayal as I was, in a city where I knew nobody except the man who was waiting for me at O'Hare, probably pacing the arrivals area and wondering how his ex-wife could abandon their son for a tropical vacation. The plane lifted off into the evening sky, and I closed my eyes, trying not to think about the woman who was supposed to love me, unconditionally laughing on a beach in Hawaii while her 15-year-old son flew into an uncertain future with nothing but a duct-taped suitcase and the devastating knowledge that some people really could walk away from anyone, even their own children. Even me. Dad was waiting at baggage claim when I landed at O'Hare, and I could tell from his face that he'd been having the same kind of afternoon I had, the kind where everything you thought you knew about your family suddenly revealed itself to be built on quicksand. He looked older than when I'd seen him at Christmas, more tired around the eyes, wearing the rumpled khakis and button-down shirt that meant he'd come straight from his office at the accounting firm without stopping to change. But when he saw me walking down the corridor with my duct-taped suitcase, his face brightened with the kind of relief that made my chest ache. "Alex," he said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than our usual greetings. Jesus, I was so worried. "I'm okay," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. No, you're not. And that's okay too. Dad had always been the more emotionally straightforward of my parents, the one who said what he meant without layers of subtext or manipulation. It was one of the things that had made the divorce so hard, losing daily access to the parent who actually communicated clearly. Did you talk to Mom? I asked as we walked toward the parking garage. Dad's jaw tightened. I talked to her, and she's apparently decided that parenting is optional when it interferes with her social life. We found his car, a 10-year-old Honda Accord. That was the opposite of Derek's flashy BMW, and drove through the evening traffic toward his apartment in Lincoln Park. The city looked different at night, all lit up and alive in ways that Minneapolis never seemed to be. I'd visited Dad dozens of times over the past 3 years, but I'd always been a tourist here, someone just passing through. Now, looking out at the Chicago skyline, I wondered if this might actually become home. What did she say exactly? I asked. Dad was quiet for a long moment, navigating around a taxi that was double-parked outside a restaurant. She said that Derek had surprised her with the Hawaii trip, that it was supposed to be a romantic getaway, and that she didn't want to disappoint him by bringing you along. So she disappointed me instead. So she abandoned her son at an airport instead. The anger in Dad's voice was controlled but unmistakable. I'd heard him frustrated with Mom before, during the divorce proceedings, during arguments about custody arrangements, during the occasional heated phone call about child support. But this was different. This was deeper. She said it was just for a week, that you could stay with friends or figure something out until they got back. Figure something out. I repeated the phrase, trying to understand how a parent could use those words about their 15-year-old child. Like what? Live on the streets? Break into the house? I asked her the same thing. What did she say? She said you were mature for your age and that this was an opportunity for you to learn independence. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, processing this. My mother had abandoned me at an airport and was calling it a learning opportunity. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. When you and Mom got divorced, did you know she was going to become someone completely different? Like, did you see this coming? Dad was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was trying to figure out how much honesty a 15-year-old could handle. I knew she was unhappy, he said finally. Unhappy with our life, with being married to an accountant, with living in the suburbs and driving carpool and doing all the normal things that normal families do. She wanted something more exciting, more glamorous, more like Derek. Yeah, more like Derek. But did you think she would choose that over me? No. The word came out flat and definitive. I thought, whatever else happened, she'd always put you first. That's what parents do. But she didn't. No, she didn't. Dad's apartment was small but comfortable. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room that doubled as his home office, and a kitchen just big enough for 2 people if they didn't mind bumping into each other. He'd converted the dining area into a bedroom for my summer visits, complete with a twin bed, a desk, and shelves for my books and games. It had always felt temporary before, like a place I was visiting rather than living. Tonight it felt like a life raft. Are you hungry? Dad asked, opening the refrigerator and staring at its sparse contents. I've got eggs. Some leftover Chinese food from Monday that's probably still good. I'm not really hungry. When's the last time you ate? I tried to remember. I had a pretzel at the airport around 2. That was 6 hours ago. You need to eat something. He ordered pizza from a place down the street, and we sat on his couch eating pepperoni slices and watching SportsCenter while pretending that this was a normal summer evening and not the beginning of whatever my life was going to become now. Dad, I said during a commercial break, what happens now? What do you mean? I mean, what happens to me? Do I go back to Minneapolis when Mom gets back from Hawaii? Do I stay here? What about school in the fall? Dad muted the TV and turned to face me. What do you want to happen? It was the second time in 2 days that someone had asked me what I wanted, and I still didn't have a good answer. I don't want to go back to her, I said quietly. I don't want to live with someone who could abandon me like that. Then you don't have to. Is it that simple? Legally? No, it's going to be complicated. We'll probably need to go back to court, modify the custody arrangement, figure out the logistics of you living here full-time. Can we do that? Alex, after what she did today, I don't think any judge in the world would force you to live with her if you don't want to. But what about school? And your apartment is too small for both of us long-term. We'll figure it out. I'll find a bigger place, get you enrolled at Lincoln Park High, whatever it takes. What if I'm too much trouble? What if having me here full-time messes up your life? Dad set down his pizza slice and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Alex, you are my son. You're not trouble. You're not an inconvenience. You're not something I need to manage around my social life. You're my kid, and if you want to live here, then this is your home. Period. What about dating? Don't you want to meet someone, maybe get married again someday? Maybe someday. But any woman who can't accept that I have a son isn't someone I'd want to marry anyway. It was such a simple concept. A parent prioritizing their child over their romantic life. But after 3 years of watching, Mom do the opposite. It felt revolutionary. My phone rang. Mom's number. Do you want to answer it? Dad asked. No, I said without hesitation. Whatever she has to say, I don't want to hear it right now. Fair enough. The phone went to voicemail, then immediately started ringing again. She's going to keep calling, I said. Probably. But you don't have to talk to her until you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Then that's your choice to make. We let the phone ring 4 more times before I finally turned it off completely. Dad, can I tell you something? Of course. I keep thinking about this morning, about how weird she was acting when she drove me to the airport. And I think she was feeling guilty about what she was going to do, but she did it anyway. Does that make it better or worse? Dad thought about this for a moment. I think it makes it worse, he said finally, because it means she knew it was wrong and she chose to do it anyway. That's what I think too. We finished our pizza and watched the rest of SportsCenter. Then Dad showed me where he kept the extra blankets and pillows. Tomorrow we'll start figuring things out, he said. Tonight, just try to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in the narrow bed in Dad's makeshift guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. This morning, I'd been a kid with 2 parents, living in Minneapolis, planning to spend the summer in Chicago before returning home for my sophomore year of high school. Tonight, I was a kid with 1 parent, abandoned by the other, trying to figure out how to build a life in a city where I knew nobody except my father. The strangest part wasn't the practical logistics. Those would work themselves out eventually. The strangest part was how quickly my perspective on everything had shifted. This morning, Mom's relationship with Derek had seemed like an annoying complication in my otherwise normal family life. Tonight, I understood that it had been the slow-motion dissolution of my childhood, with today being the moment when the last illusions finally collapsed. Around midnight, I heard Dad's phone ring in his bedroom. Then I heard him talking in the low, angry voice he used when he was trying not to wake me up, but couldn't keep his emotions completely in check. No. Lisa, you don't get to call here and act like you're the victim. Yes, he's safe, no thanks to you. A week? You abandoned your 15-year-old son for a week and you think that's acceptable? I don't care what Derek thinks about anything. And the fact that you do is exactly the problem. I pulled a pillow over my head, but I could still hear fragments of the conversation through the thin walls. Court order if necessary. Full. Custody? What kind of mother? When? Dad's voice finally went quiet. I lay there thinking about the last time I'd felt truly safe with Mom. It had been over a year ago, maybe longer. Somewhere in the process of becoming Derek's girlfriend, she'd stopped being my mother in any meaningful sense. Today had just made it official. My phone, which I'd turned back on to set an alarm, buzzed with a text message. Mom. Alex, honey, I'm so sorry about the confusion today. Dad explained everything and I feel terrible. Derek surprised me with this trip and I panicked about the timing. I should have handled it better. We'll talk when I get back and figure everything out. Love you so much. When I read the message 3 times, looking for any acknowledgement of what she'd actually done. Confusion. Poor timing. Should have handled it better. Like she'd forgotten to pick me up from soccer practice, not abandoned me at an airport. I started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. Finally, I wrote, "There's nothing to figure out. I'm staying with Dad." I hit send and turned the phone off again. From Dad's room, I could hear him moving around, probably too angry and worried to sleep. I wondered if he was lying awake, thinking about custody lawyers and school districts and all the ways his quiet, organized life was about to change. Wondered if he was having second thoughts about taking on a full-time teenager. But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me in the airport, relieved, and worried and absolutely certain that I belonged with him. And I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, at least I'd be facing them with someone who actually wanted me around. At 15, I was learning that love wasn't just about what people said or the biological connections that tied you together. Love was about showing up when things got hard, making room in your life for people who needed you, choosing family over convenience. Mom had chosen Derek and Hawaii and her new identity as a woman who could abandon her responsibilities when they interfered with her happiness. Dad had chosen me. It shouldn't have been a difficult choice for either of them. But apparently it was, and the person who made the right choice was the one I'd be building my future with. Tomorrow, we'd start figuring out what that future looked like. Tonight, for the first time in months, I fell asleep feeling safe. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a family court waiting room in Cook County, watching Dad pace back and forth while his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, reviewed our case file one more time. "Remember," she said to me, not looking up from her papers, "the judge is going to ask you directly what you want. Be honest, be clear, and don't let your mother's attorney try to confuse you or make you feel guilty." "What if she cries?" I asked. "Mom, what if she gets emotional and tries to make it seem like I'm breaking her heart?" Patricia looked up then, her expression serious but kind. "Alex, your mother abandoned you at an airport. She chose a vacation with her boyfriend over her child's safety and well-being. If she cries, that's about her guilt, not about your decision. Don't let her tears manipulate you into forgetting what she did." Mom had returned from Hawaii 5 days ago, tanned and relaxed and apparently shocked that I wasn't waiting at home ready to pretend nothing had happened. She'd called Dad's apartment constantly, demanding to speak to me, threatening legal action, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations that Dad was poisoning me against her. I'd talked to her exactly once, a conversation that had lasted less than 3 minutes. "Alex, baby, you have to come home," she'd said, her voice thick with tears that might have been genuine. "This is all a misunderstanding. Derek and I never meant for you to feel abandoned." "But I was abandoned," I'd replied. "You literally left me at an airport and flew to Hawaii. It was only supposed to be for a week. I thought you could stay with Marcus or maybe go to Dad's early. You didn't arrange any of that. You didn't even tell me you were going?" I know, and I'm sorry. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through this as a family." "What family?" "You and Derek?" "You, me, and Derek. We're all family now." That's when I'd hung up. Now we were here, in a courthouse that smelled like disinfectant and desperation, waiting for a judge to decide where a 15-year-old boy should live when his mother had proven she couldn't be trusted with basic parental responsibilities. "Alex," Dad said, stopping his pacing and sitting down beside me, "whatever happens in there, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. It takes courage to stand up for yourself, especially against a parent. What if the judge doesn't believe us? What if Mom convinces them that this is just teenage drama? Then we appeal, we fight. We do whatever we have to do to keep you safe." The bailiff called our case, and we filed into the courtroom, a formal, wood-paneled space that felt more like a library than the place where my future was about to be decided. Mom was already there with her lawyer. sitting at the opposite table wearing a conservative navy dress that was nothing like her usual Derek-influenced style. She looked smaller somehow, older, like the past few weeks had cost her something essential. Mom was already there with her lawyer, sitting at the opposite table wearing a conservative navy dress that was nothing like her usual Derek-influenced style. She looked smaller somehow, older, like the past few weeks had cost her something essential. When she saw me, she smiled hopefully. The same smile she'd used when I was little, and she wanted me to forgive her for missing a school play or forgetting a promise. It was a smile that had always worked before. Today, it just made me sad. Judge Martinez was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of calm authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. She reviewed our case file, asked a few preliminary questions of the lawyers, then looked directly at me. "Alex, I understand you want to live with your father instead of your mother. Can you tell me why?" I'd practiced this moment with Patricia, but sitting in that courtroom with everyone's eyes on me, the words felt harder to find. "Your Honor, my mom left me at the airport on June 15th while she went to Hawaii with her boyfriend," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. She canceled my flight to Chicago without telling me, dropped me off at the terminal, and flew away while I was stranded there with no way to contact anyone and nowhere to go. And how did that make you feel? Scared, confused, like I didn't matter to her as much as her boyfriend did. Mom's lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit, leaned forward. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that this incident was poorly handled, but it was an aberration, not a pattern. Ms. Morgan is a loving mother who made a mistake in judgment. She abandoned a minor child at an airport," Judge Martinez interrupted. "That's not a mistake in judgment. That's child endangerment. The child was not in any real danger. He's mature for his age, and she knew his father would be able to help if needed. She knew his father would help because she had canceled his flight to his father without telling anyone," Patricia interjected. "Alex was supposed to be in Chicago that day, but instead he was stranded at Minneapolis-St. Paul International with $50 and no idea why his travel plans had been sabotaged." Judge Martinez looked at Mom's lawyer with an expression that suggested she was not impressed with his arguments. "Ms. Morgan," she said, addressing my mother directly, "can you explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to leave your 15-year-old son at an airport while you traveled out of state?" Mom stood up, smoothing her dress nervously. "Your Honor, I know how this looks, but it wasn't as bad as everyone is making it seem. Derek had surprised me with this trip to Hawaii, and I panicked about the timing. Alex was supposed to go to his father's anyway, just a day later, and I thought he could handle staying with a friend for one night." "Did you arrange for him to stay with a friend?" "Well, no, but did you tell him about your travel plans?" "Not exactly, but did you ensure he had adequate money, transportation, or adult supervision? He had his cell phone, and I knew his father would—" "Ms. Morgan, please answer the question I asked. Did you ensure your son had adequate money, transportation, or adult supervision?" Mom was quiet for a long moment. "No, Your Honor, I didn't." "And why didn't you?" "Because I was thinking about Derek's feelings instead of Alex's safety," Mom said quietly. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she sounded like she understood the gravity of what she'd done. Judge Martinez made some notes, then looked back at me. "Alex, your mother says she made a mistake, that this was an isolated incident of poor judgment. Do you believe that's true?" I thought about the past 3 years, about all the times Mom had chosen Derek's preferences over my needs, about the gradual erosion of our relationship as she became more invested in her new identity as Derek's girlfriend. "No, Your Honor," I said. "This wasn't isolated. For the past 3 years, ever since she started dating Derek, she's been putting his wants ahead of my needs, missing school events because Derek had work dinners, canceling plans with me because Derek wanted to do something else, making me feel like I was a burden who was interfering with their relationship. Can you give me specific examples?" "Last year, she missed my school's academic awards ceremony because Derek wanted to go to a wine tasting. The year before that, she canceled my birthday party because Derek thought it would be too loud and stressful. She's missed parent-teacher conferences, doctor's appointments, and even Christmas morning because Derek's schedule took priority. Your Honor, Mom's lawyer interrupted. These are normal adjustments that happen when a parent enters a new relationship. Normal adjustments don't include abandoning your child at an airport, Judge Martinez said sharply. Continue, Alex. The thing is, Your Honor, I don't think she sees me as her son anymore. I think she sees me as an obstacle to the life she wants with Derek. And the airport thing wasn't her making a mistake. It was her choosing between Derek's happiness and my safety. And she chose Derek. Mom started crying then, quiet tears that she wiped away with tissues her lawyer handed her. But they weren't the manipulative tears I'd been expecting. They looked like grief, like someone finally understanding what they'd lost. Alex, Judge Martinez said gently, living with your father full-time would mean changing schools, leaving your friends in Minneapolis, starting over in a new city. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Your Honor. I've already enrolled at Lincoln Park High for the fall. My dad found us a bigger apartment so I can have my own room. And honestly, most of my real friends have been Marcus and a couple other people. And I can stay in touch with them online. And you? Mr. Morgan, the judge said, turning to Dad. Are you prepared to take on full-time custody of a teenager? This would mean child support, educational expenses, being responsible for all of Alex's daily needs. Your Honor, I've been wanting full custody since the divorce, Dad said. Alex is my son. Taking care of him isn't a burden. It's a privilege. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to give him a stable, loving home. Judge Martinez made more notes, then asked both lawyers if they had anything else to add. Mom's lawyer made a final plea about the importance of maternal bonds and the possibility of family counseling. Patricia simply pointed out that Alex had been abandoned by one parent and welcomed by the other, and that the choice of where he should live was obvious. I'm going to take a 15-minute recess to review this case, Judge Martinez said. When I return, I'll announce my decision. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. We sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, Dad alternately checking his phone and squeezing my shoulder reassuringly. Patricia reviewed her notes one more time, and Mom sat across the hall with her lawyer, occasionally glancing over at us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Alex? She called out finally, standing up and walking toward us despite her lawyer's obvious disapproval. Lisa, I don't think... Dad started, but I held up a hand. It's okay, I said. Mom sat down across from me, her makeup slightly smudged from crying, her hands twisted together in her lap. I need you to know that I love you, she said quietly. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you more than anything. If you love me more than anything, why did you choose Derek over me? I didn't choose Derek over you. I chose Derek's happiness in that moment because I was scared of disappointing him, scared of losing him. But I never stopped loving you. Love isn't just a feeling, Mom. It's a choice you make every day. And for 3 years, you've been choosing Derek every time it mattered. That's not... She started, then stopped. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, too, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry that you became someone who could abandon her kid at an airport. I'm sorry that Derek matters more to you than I do. And I'm sorry that it took losing me completely for you to understand what you'd been doing. It doesn't have to be losing you completely. We could work on this, go to counseling, find a way to be a family again. What family? You and Derek made your choice about what your family looks like, and it doesn't include me. Not really. That's not true. Mom, when's the last time you and I did something together without Derek? When's the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something. When's the last time you put my needs ahead of his preferences? She was quiet for a long time, thinking. I can't remember, she said finally. Neither can I. The bailiff called us back into the courtroom. Judge Martinez had returned with a decision that would determine the next 3 years of my life. After reviewing the evidence and testimony in this case, she said, I find that it is in Alex's best interest to live with his father. The incident at the airport demonstrates a pattern of prioritizing adult relationships over parental responsibilities. And Alex has clearly expressed his preference for living with the parent who has consistently demonstrated commitment to his well-being. She awarded Dad full physical custody, with Mom getting supervised visitation rights that could be modified if she completed family counseling and demonstrated consistent, responsible parenting behavior. However, Judge Martinez continued, looking at Mom, I want to be clear that this decision is not permanent. If you can show that you've made genuine changes in your priorities and parenting approach, and if Alex chooses to modify this arrangement in the future, the court would be willing to reconsider. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. Mom nodded, tears streaming down her face. But understand this, Ms. Morgan. Parenting is not optional. It's not something you do when it's convenient or when it doesn't interfere with your other relationships. If you want to be Alex's mother in any meaningful sense, you need to start acting like his well-being is your primary concern, not an afterthought. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief, yes, but also sadness. Not sadness about leaving Mom. That decision felt right and necessary. Sadness about the mother I'd lost somewhere in the past 3 years, the woman who used to put me first, who used to make me feel like the most important person in her world. That woman probably wouldn't have abandoned me at an airport. But she also didn't exist anymore. Maybe hadn't existed for a long time. The woman who did exist had made her choice, and now I'd made mine. Dad and I celebrated with deep dish pizza and Cubs tickets, but even in the middle of celebrating this victory, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd lost and what I was going to have to build in its place. I was 15 years old, legally living with the parent who wanted me, enrolled in a new school, starting over in a city that was becoming home. But I was also 15 years old with a mother who had chosen her boyfriend over her son, who had abandoned me when I needed her most, who had taught me that some kinds of love come with conditions that can change without warning. Learning to trust people again was going to take time. Learning to build a family with Dad, just the two of us, was going to take time. Learning to let go of the fantasy that Mom would somehow become the parent I needed her to be was going to take time. But for the first time since that morning at the airport, I felt like I had time. I had a safe place to figure things out, a parent who would show up when I needed him, and the freedom to build relationships based on choice rather than obligation. It wasn't the family I'd started with, but it was going to be a family built on something more solid than convenience and compromise. It was going to be built on love that showed up every single day, even when it was hard. 2 years later, I was standing in my cap and gown at Lincoln Park High School's graduation ceremony, scanning the crowd for Dad's face in the sea of parents and relatives celebrating their kids' achievements. I found him in the 3rd row, holding up his phone to record my walk across the stage, wearing the same proud expression he'd had at every school event, every parent-teacher conference, every small milestone that had marked my journey from abandoned 15-year-old to graduating senior. Beside him sat Patricia Chen, Dad's lawyer who had become something much more important over the past 18 months. And next to her, Marcus, who had driven down from Minneapolis with his parents to see his best friend. Graduate, a friendship that had not only survived the distance but grown, stronger through weekly video calls and summer visits. Alex Morgan, the principal announced, and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, hearing Dad's voice rise above the general applause with a, "That's my son," that made my face burn with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. As I shook hands with the principal and posed for the official photo, I caught sight of someone unexpected in the back of the auditorium. Mom, standing alone near the exit, wearing a simple blue dress and looking older than her 40 years. She'd been trying to rebuild our relationship for the past 2 years, showing up to supervised visitations, completing the family counseling the court had required, sending birthday cards and graduation gifts that sat unopened on my desk for weeks before I finally worked up the courage to look at them. The efforts were genuine, I knew that now. But they were also about 2 years and 1 airport abandonment too late. After the ceremony, I found Dad and Patricia and Marcus in the crowd of celebrating families, accepting congratulations and posing for photos that would mark the end of my high school career and the beginning of whatever came next. "I'm so proud of you," Dad said, pulling me into one of his bear hugs. "Northwestern, full scholarship, pre-med track. Your mother always said you were going to be someone special." He still mentioned Mom sometimes, usually in contexts like this, memories from when I was younger, when she'd been present and engaged and optimistic about my future. It didn't hurt anymore hearing those references. They felt like stories about someone I used to know, not someone whose absence still left wounds. "Photos," Marcus announced, grabbing my phone. "We need to document this historic moment when Alex officially became too educated for the rest of us." We spent the next hour taking pictures and making plans for the graduation party Dad and Patricia were hosting at our apartment, the larger two-bedroom place we'd moved to after the custody hearing, where I'd spent 2 years building a life that felt stable and chosen rather than accidental. As the crowd began to thin out, Mom approached our group hesitantly, like someone walking up to a house where they weren't sure they'd be welcome. "Congratulations, Alex," she said quietly. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," I replied, polite but not warm. We'd worked out this careful choreography over the past 2 years. Civil. Interaction that acknowledged our biological connection without pretending we had an actual relationship. "I was wondering if I could talk to you." "For a few minutes," she said. "If you have time." I looked at Dad, who nodded slightly. Over the years, he'd learned to follow my lead when it came to interactions with Mom, never pushing me toward forgiveness, but never actively discouraging contact either. "5 minutes," I said. We walked to a quieter corner of the auditorium, away from the celebrating families and the echoes of the past 2 years. "I know you're leaving for college in the fall," Mom said, "and I wanted to give you this." She handed me an envelope, thick and cream-colored, with my name written in her familiar handwriting. "What is it?" "A letter. Things I've wanted to say to you for 2 years but never found the right moment for." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "You could have just said them now," I tried. "Every time we've met for those supervised visits, I've tried to find words for how sorry I am, how much I regret what I did to us. But sorry seems too small for abandoning your child, and regret doesn't undo the damage." She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. The glamorous sheen that Derek had brought to her life had faded, leaving behind someone who looked like she was carrying the weight of choices she couldn't take back. "Derek and I broke up 6 months ago," she said quietly. This was news to me. In our carefully managed interactions, personal details about her life rarely came up. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and was surprised to find that I mostly meant it. "I'm not. I mean, I'm sorry about how it ended, but I'm not sorry it's over. I spent 5 years trying to be someone else, someone more exciting and spontaneous and worthy of a man like Derek. And in the process, I stopped being your mother. You chose to stop being my mother. You're right. I did choose that. Every time Derek's preferences conflicted with your needs, I chose him. Every time his idea of our future didn't include space for a teenager, I found ways to minimize your presence in our lives. So why are you telling me this now?" Mom was quiet for a moment, watching other families say their goodbyes and make plans for celebration dinners. "Because you're 18 now, and going away to college, and I wanted you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not the only mistake, but the biggest one. And you think that changes anything?" "No, I don't think it changes anything. I think I lost the right to be your mother when I left you at that airport, and I think you've built a good life with your father that doesn't need me in it." This was not what I'd expected her to say. For 2 years, her approach to our relationship had been cautious attempts to rebuild, careful overtures toward reconciliation, hope that time and consistent effort could repair what she'd broken. "Then why are you here?" I asked. "Because you're my son, and I wanted to see you graduate. And because I wanted to tell you that I understand why you can't forgive me, and I don't expect you to try." I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, raised me for 15 years, then abandoned me for a man who was now out of her life entirely, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. "Mom, I did forgive you. I said quietly. What? Not right away, and not because you deserved it, but because carrying anger was exhausting. I forgave you so I could stop thinking about you all the time. Stop letting what you did define how I saw myself. But you don't want a relationship with me? No, I don't. Because you can't trust me. Because I don't need you, I said, and watched her face crumple slightly. I needed a mother when I was 15 and scared and abandoned at an airport. I needed a mother when I was starting a new school and trying to figure out how to build a life in a new city. I needed a mother when I was applying to colleges and learning to drive and having my heart broken by Sarah Chen from my chemistry class. And I wasn't there for any of that. No, you weren't, but Dad was. And Patricia was once she and Dad started dating. And Marcus was, even from 300 miles away. And my teachers and coaches and the other adults who stepped in when you stepped out. So you don't need me anymore. So you don't need me anymore. I don't need a mother anymore. I'm 18. I'm going to college. I'm building an adult life. What I needed from you was the foundation that would help me get to this point. And you took that away when you chose Derek over me. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. The same kind of calculated emotional display she'd used throughout my childhood, except this time it seemed genuine. The letter, she said, gesturing to the envelope in my hands. It explains everything. Why I made the choices I did, how losing your father changed me, how terrified I was of being alone, how Derek made me feel young and desirable and important in ways I hadn't felt since the divorce. Explanations aren't the same as excuses. I know. That's why I'm not asking you to excuse what I did. I'm just asking you to understand it. Maybe. Someday when you're older and you've made your own mistakes with people you love. I looked at the envelope, thick with pages of explanations and apologies and probably hopes for a reconciliation that wasn't going to happen. I'll read it, I said, but it won't change anything. I know, and I won't respond to it. I know. And this doesn't mean we're going to start having a relationship. I'm not going to call you from college or invite you to visit or include you in my life going forward. I know. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by my honesty in a way that should have made me feel guilty, but instead just made me sad for what we'd both lost. I love you, Alex, she said. I know I didn't show it when it mattered, but I do love you. I know you do. But love that only shows up when it's convenient isn't really love. It's just guilt trying to make itself feel better. I walked back to Dad and Patricia and Marcus, leaving Mom standing alone in the corner of the auditorium with her regrets and her explanations and the life she'd built without me in it. Everything okay? Dad asked. Yeah, I said. Everything's fine. That evening, at the graduation party in our apartment, I was surrounded by the people who had actually shown up for the past 2 years, Dad and Patricia, Marcus and his parents, my chemistry teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, who had become a mentor, my track coach who had taught me about discipline and perseverance, the neighbors who had welcomed me to Chicago and treated me like family. It wasn't a big party, but it was full of people who had chosen to be part of my life, who had made space for me in their world, who had proven that family was something you built rather than something you were stuck with. Speech, Marcus announced around 10 o'clock, after we'd eaten too much pizza and ice cream cake. The graduate needs to give a speech. No speeches, I protested, but Patricia was already handing me a soda can to use as a microphone. Come on, Dad said, grinning. Tell us what you've learned in the past 2 years. I looked around the room at these people who had become my chosen family, who had helped me rebuild my life from the wreckage of abandonment and betrayal, and realized I did have something to say. I learned that being abandoned doesn't mean you're not worth loving, I said, feeling self-conscious but determined to get the words out. It means the person who abandoned you wasn't capable of the kind of love you deserved. Damn right, Marcus said, raising his soda can in salute. I learned that families aren't just the people you're related to. They're the people who show up when you need them, who make room for you in their lives, who choose you every day instead of just when it's convenient. Dad wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide that he was getting emotional. And I learned that starting over isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Sometimes it's the best thing, because it means you get to choose what you build instead of just accepting what you inherited. To choosing what we build, Patricia said. Raising her glass. To showing up when it matters, Dad added. To the family we made, I finished. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Dad and Patricia were cleaning up in the kitchen, I sat on my bed and opened Mom's letter. It was 12 pages long, written in her careful handwriting, full of explanations about her fear of aging, her panic about being alone, her desperate need to feel wanted by someone who chose her rather than someone who was stuck with her after a divorce. She wrote about watching Dad and me together during those early custody visits, seeing how easily we communicated, how naturally he stepped into full-time parenting, how happy I seemed in Chicago compared to how I'd been in Minneapolis during those final months. She wrote about Derek's ultimatum, that if she wanted a serious future with him, she needed to prioritize their relationship over what he called the baggage from her previous life. She wrote about the morning she drove me to the airport, how she'd sat in the parking lot afterward and cried, knowing she'd just made a choice that would define the rest of our relationship. She wrote about the 2 years since then, the therapy sessions, the supervised visits where I was polite but distant, the growing realization that some mistakes are too big to fix and some relationships are too damaged to rebuild. And she wrote about watching me graduate, seeing the man I was becoming, understanding that I'd grown up without her and grown up well, and being proud of me even though she'd forfeited the right to take any credit for who I'd become. It was honest and heartbreaking and completely irrelevant to my life now. I folded the letter back up and put it in my desk drawer, next to the birthday cards I'd eventually opened and the Christmas gifts I'd eventually acknowledged. Not because I was saving them for sentimental reasons, but because throwing them away felt unnecessarily cruel. She was my mother. She'd made terrible choices that had nearly destroyed me, but she was also a person who was living with the consequences of those choices, and punishing her further wasn't going to heal anything that mattered. 3 months later, I left for Northwestern University with a full scholarship, a pre-med track that would keep me busy for the next 8 years, and a chosen family that had taught me the difference between love that shows up and love that makes excuses. Dad drove me to campus in his Honda, now 8 years older but still running perfectly. We loaded my dorm room with the basics: bedding, clothes, books, the coffee maker that Patricia insisted I'd need for studying, and then stood in the hallway saying goodbye. "You know I'm proud of you, right?" Dad said, pulling me into one of his bear hugs. "I know. And you know that if you need anything, money, advice, someone to listen, you just call. I know. And you know that Chicago is always home, no matter where your career takes you." I know. Dad, I know. He drove away and I stood in the doorway of my dorm room, looking at the space where I'd spend the next year building the next chapter of my life. On my desk, I'd placed a framed photo from graduation day, Dad and Patricia and Marcus and me, all grinning at the camera, all clearly happy to be exactly where we were with exactly the people we'd chosen to be there with. It wasn't the family I'd started with, but it was the family I'd built from the wreckage of abandonment and betrayal, and the hard-won knowledge that love is a choice you make every day. At 18, I knew things about family and loyalty and commitment that most people don't learn until much later, if they learn them at all. I knew that being chosen was better than being tolerated, knew that showing up was more important than sharing DNA. I knew that the people who loved you when it was hard were the people worth building a life with, and I knew that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, being abandoned by someone who should have protected you, can become the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you, learning to recognize real love when you find it. Mom had taught me that lesson, just not in the way she'd intended. Dad had taught me that lesson by living it every single day, and now I was ready to pass it on to whatever family I'd choose to build in the years ahead. The kind of family that shows up, the kind of family that stays, the kind of family that chooses love over convenience every single time it matters.